Well, for 4 years during the Trump administration, war in the Middle East was the dog that didn't bark, as in it was, you might not notice it because you didn't see the wars, you didn't see the conflict. And we started to think maybe that was normal. In fact, peace broke out all over the place. Not just one peace deal, but many. The so-called Abraham Accords. Trump managed to do the impossible, get Israel to have a true and warm peace with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Sudan, with Morocco. If any one of those deals had been done under a Democrat administration, there would be Nobel Prizes all around, but not so for Trump. Well, that era of peace, in my view, was because the actors in the region either feared or respected Trump. That seems to be gone, because now war is breaking out between Israel and Gaza. And joining us now to talk about it is our friend Joel Pollak, Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart.com. Am I unfair to hang this around the neck of Joe Biden and his foreign policy? Is he really a proximate cause of this violence? I mean, there's been violence in that region for a long time. Did Biden give a sort of permission for this to reignite?
Well, let's just be clear about where the responsibility ultimately lies. It lies with the Palestinian leadership and with Iran, which funds and arms Palestinian terrorists, terrorists in Lebanon, terrorists in other parts of the Middle East and around the world. And they have played the fundamental role in fomenting this conflict. They are also attempting to pressure the United States, which is looking for some way to capitulate and accept very weak terms in some kind of return to the old nuclear deal. That's a separate issue. But Iran is ultimately responsible, as are the Palestinian terrorists. But Biden's policy on Israel has also played a contributing role. A month ago, the Biden administration announced hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. taxpayer funds for the Palestinians, in apparent violation of the Taylor Force Act, which prevents Americans' funds from being spent on the Palestinian Authority while it still subsidizes terrorism. The Biden administration wanted to reach out to the Palestinians. They want to entice them back to the negotiating table, so they offered them this money with no strings attached, no requirement to end supporting terror, to end incitement, to negotiate with Israel, nothing. And that signaled to the Palestinians that they have the green light to be more aggressive with Israel. And it also signaled that the Biden administration was not going to stand with Israel in a moment of need. And we now see that happening. The Palestinians fomented riots last Friday using the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam, to store weapons, including stones, Molotov cocktails, fireworks. They used those weapons to attack innocent Jewish worshipers at the Western Wall, to attack Israeli police, to do other kinds of attacks, including an attempted lynching outside the walls of the old city. I'm not sure if those stones that were thrown at the Israeli driver who was almost lynched came from inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it was part of that general riot. When Israeli police moved in to try to clear out the rioters, the Palestinians claimed that there was an attack on the mosque by the Israeli authorities, which wasn't the case, of course. Israel has had sovereignty over the Temple Mount for almost 65 years now, 55 years, and nothing like that has happened. Israel's never attacked the mosques. Israel has protected the mosques, but it's the Palestinians who have used them as cover for these occasional attacks on innocent civilians and on police officers. Now you have Hamas exploiting the situation to fire rockets at Jerusalem and at Israel, and Israel's been required to defend itself, taking out the rocket launchers, taking out the Hamas terrorists in charge of all this. Hamas is then unleashing whatever it has at Israel, hundreds and hundreds of rockets, including longer range rockets that have reached as far as Tel Aviv and other cities in Israel's heavily populated central region. And Biden has equivocated. He's basically said, well, we condemn the rocket fire, but we also condemn Israel's policies on this and that. There's a property dispute in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah over some homes that used to be owned by Jews before 1948, were seized by Jordan when they took the region over in 1948, and then were given to Arab residents. Now the Jews want their property back, and there's been a court fight over it for decades. It's a complicated legal issue, but it's certainly not anything that ought to trigger over 1,000 rockets, 1,200 rockets, in fact, fired by Palestinians at Israel. Incidentally, 200 of those 1,200 rockets, 1 out of every 6 rockets, has landed on a Palestinian area in Gaza. So these rockets still remain rather primitive, even though they're going further and further. And the Palestinians are killing their own people. As long as some of the rockets might make through, you think about the math this way. If they fired 1,200 rockets, 200 hit Palestinians, and of those 1,200, about 90% get stopped by the Iron Dome, or of the remaining 1,000, 90% get stopped by the Iron Dome. So you have 100 rockets that have a chance of making it through and hitting something in Israel, and that something is usually an Israeli civilian. So that's dozens of rockets hitting civilian targets in Israel, and it would have been much worse without the Iron Dome system. Biden is not standing with Israel as Trump did. You can look at episodes under Trump where Hamas started firing rockets and Trump said that he was going to stand with Israel 100%. He was not equivocating, not talking about anything Israel needed to do. And this is one of those cases. This was completely unprovoked. Israel did nothing to provoke this whatsoever. The supposed causes, like a court case in the Israeli Supreme Court, and the riots on the last Friday in Ramadan, which were pre-planned, have nothing to do with Israel or anything Israel did to Palestinians at all. And this is just pure incitement and provocation by the Palestinians. Now they're in the middle of a war, and Biden, instead of siding with Israel, is siding with the terrorists and with the Palestinians. He has sent his envoy, this guy, Amr, who is the deputy undersecretary of whatever for Israel and Palestinian relations, and he's going to Israel to tell them to de-escalate. This guy has a history, Mr. Hadi Amr, of anti-Israel rhetoric, of justifying Palestinian violence, of calling Israel an apartheid state and referring to it as ethnic cleansing or whatever. This is the wrong guy to send because Israel is just going to ignore him. And I don't think Israel is taking the Biden administration all that seriously. But the Biden administration can put a lot of pressure on Israel. They can start doing what left-wing Democrats want them to do. They can start cutting off military aid and all of that. But it's now clear to Israel that they don't have a friend in the White House. And it's also clear to the Palestinians. So in that sense, it's a provocation. Letting the region know that the United States doesn't stand with Israel anymore and is willing to give the Palestinians money for nothing certainly played a role in triggering this round of violence.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.